Good afternoon and welcome to the inaugural Hearst Community Initiative Town Hall Speaker Series. My name is Evan Zislis. I'm the Director of Community Engagement for the Aspen Institute's Hearst Community Initiative. The work of HCI is focused on promoting dialogue, increasing understanding, and facilitating opportunities for meaningful collaboration among the communities of Aspen to Parachute, Colorado, located on ancestral lands of the Ute tribe. Today is the fourth event of an 8-part speaker series in a collaboration with the regional public libraries and chambers of commerce of Aspen, Basalt, Carbondale, Glenwood Springs, Newcastle, Silt, Rifle, and Parachute. Every 2 weeks from now until the end of July, you can tune in to learn more about the issues facing our communities and the local experts working to find collaborative solutions to the shared challenges of our region. Today's topic is wildfire season, a closer look at the Colorado River Valley and beyond, co-hosted by the Newcastle Branch Library and the Newcastle Chamber of Commerce. Today's Zoom host is Garfield County Libraries, and interpretation to Spanish is brought to you by Velasco Language Services. I'll now turn it over to Alex with Garfield County Libraries for instructions on selecting English and Spanish.
Thank you, Evan, and thank you everybody for joining us today. Let me go ahead and share my screen so I can give you the instructions. So we are in a webinar. We'll be using two functions to communicate. We do have a chat box. If you have any questions, comments, or any technical difficulties to bring up with our panelists or with myself, please use chat. We will try to help you as soon as we can. If you do have questions for our panelists or our presenters, make sure you put it into the Q&A. This will save the question for a later time, an appropriate time for us to answer it. Finally, this is being interpreted into Spanish in real time. You will see at the bottom right of your Zoom options a gridded globe icon. Make sure to click on this icon and pick the language of your choosing, English or Spanish. If you are getting some audio interference, make sure you mute original audio. If you have any question with any of the functions for Zoom, go ahead and use the chat and we will help you as soon as we can. With that, I'll turn it over back to Evan.
Thanks, Alex. For today's webinar, as Alex mentioned, please use the chat feature for technical questions. You may ask questions for our panel using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We'll leave time at the end to answer as many questions as possible. We've got a lot of ground to cover, so I want to introduce our moderator for today's discussion. Scott Fitzwilliams has been the forest supervisor of the White River National Forest since the fall of 2009. He has also served as the Deputy Forest Supervisor on the Willamette National Forest in Eugene, Oregon, and the Staff Officer for Recreation, Wilderness Lands, and Minerals on the Tongass National Forest in Sitka, Alaska, from 2001 to 2006. He was District Manager on the Little Missouri National Grassland in Dickinson, North Dakota, from 98 to 2001, and was the Public Affairs Officer for the Forest Service on the Bridger-Teton National Forest in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, from 92 to 98. For the past 30 years, Scott has been engaged in managing wildfires with the U.S. Forest Service. Scott has a BS in political science from the University of Wisconsin and an MS in environmental planning from the University of Colorado. Joining Scott today are esteemed panelists Lathan Johnson and Jim Janung. Lathan is the Deputy Unit Fire Management Officer for the Upper Colorado River Interagency Fire Management Unit in Grand Junction. He has been in wildland fire management for 27 fire seasons. Most of his career has been spent here in Western Colorado. His experience includes engines, hotshot crews, and is a fuels specialist. Lathan has a degree in forestry with a concentration in wildfire science from Colorado State University. Jim Janung is the Fire Management Officer for the Central Zone of the Upper Colorado Interagency Fire and Aviation Management Unit, covering the White River National Forest and the Colorado River Valley Field Office of the Bureau of Land Management. He has over 20 years of fire experience working for the federal land management agencies in Western Colorado and loves promoting good fire on the landscape. Both Jim and Lathan serve on the Upper Colorado River Interagency Fire Management Unit, or UCR. UCR includes BLM and U.S. Forest Service firefighting resources that cover 5.8 million acres along I-70, the Colorado River, and Roaring Fork River corridors from the Continental Divide to the Utah state line. The UCR includes the White River National Forest and the BLM's Colorado River Valley and Grand Junction field offices. The UCR cooperates with other federal and state agencies, local communities, and fire departments on a wide range of activities, including fuels, treatments, fire prevention, and suppression. We're honored to have everyone joining us today. Scott, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Evan, and thanks for having us. And thank for all the sponsors, the collaborators that make this possible. This is a great series and maybe one of the most important topics we are dealing with in Western Colorado. Certainly, after the last several years throughout the state, we're seeing the effects and the impacts of wildfire throughout our areas. And things are changing, and we're going to talk a little bit about that change. But with Lathan and Jim here, we have two, people that combined have over 50 years of experience out on the fire line in a variety of management activities, and I think they're going to be able to provide some real insight to what goes on, what to expect, what we need to do, and how we can all individually take an opportunity to improve the situation where we can. So I want to start first with a little context, because I get asked this question often before I start asking questions of Jim and Lathan. And the question I get is, why are we in this situation? Why every year does it seem like it's another record-setting year in the West? Why is it worse here in around the Roaring Fork Valley and in Colorado than it has been for people who've been around a long time? And so I think that context is really important. And I look at this as the perfect storm of three factors. And these three factors are this. Since the turn of the 20th century, starting the early 1900s, the policy to when it came to wildfire was put them out and put them out fast. We had a policy to try to have them all out by 10 a.m. And that has resulted in a huge accumulation of fuels throughout the West. And so that accumulation of fuels is one of the factors that's leading to these what we call mega fires, these fires that are huge and unprecedented. And we just did too good a job early on of putting out fires, and we're going to talk a little bit about what the result of that and how we need to change that. So that's the first factor. The second factor is climate. The changes we're seeing in the climate around here and throughout the West are having a significant impact on fire behavior. It doesn't matter what you think causes it, it's happening. And these guys that we have here today can tell you, just from personal experience, how these small changes in weather and climate are impacting fire behavior. So that's the second factor. And the third factor is we've built between 25 and 30 million homes in the Western United States, in the forested areas, in areas that are prone or traditionally susceptible to wildfire. Well, think of that, 25 to 30 million homes. That has added a complexity to firefighting and to fire management that we didn't have 30 years ago. And as subdivisions and remote developments are built into these wildland areas, it makes firefighting much more difficult, makes much more expensive, much more dangerous, and is that third factor that has brought us. So those three things: accumulation of fuels, climate, and the development in forested areas, and what we call the WUI, the wildland urban interface, has resulted in this perfect storm. And we're living that perfect storm right now, and it's not going away anytime soon. So that's some context. that I thought I'd provide early on. Now, I want to, like I said, we have two really distinguished experts. People have been, a couple of guys have been out in the trenches for a long time, and I think what they can add is significant. So, Lathan, if I could start with you, talk a little bit about the role of fire in the Intermountain West. Is this new? Tell us about that and why it's important.
Yeah, I think first, thanks a bunch for having me on. This is a great opportunity to educate the public on some really important issues around wildfire. So in terms of the role of fire in the West, I mean, the role of fire has been in part of these ecosystems for a long, long time. You think about before, we had the policy to suppress fires, there was fires just kind of free roamed around the landscapes, not only natural fires, fires that were started by lightning, they'd start midsummer and they would just roam around the landscape until, the snow put them out in the fall. So really, that's a big change. I think the other one that, especially here in Western Colorado, there's a lot of cultural burning that got done by the Native Americans. A lot of times in their hunting grounds, when they're coming off the hill in the fall, they would start fires. And so if you look back at, historic photographs and from around the turn of the century of all these towns up and down the Roaring Fork Valley and the Colorado River Valley, the forests weren't as thick. They're a lot more open. The brush wasn't as thick. So you think about that natural, what we call a fire regime, which is how often a fire burns and how intense it burns, has really become altered. Fires in a lot of our shrub species burned every 20 to 60 years. And now we've missed several cycles of those. So now they burn a lot more intensely. The other thing with having fires on the landscape, traditionally, when fires were burning all over the place, it's a patchwork, is a quilt work of areas that were younger age class versus older age class. And when a fire did burn, it hit one of those areas that burned recently. And now really with the mega fires, we're just seeing nothing out in front of them to stop them. They're not hitting any of those old burn scars. And a lot of the species, not only the brush, but the grass and the trees, they've evolved with fire, and they resprout afterwards. They're fire adapted. They need the fire to maintain kind of their vigor, and that's really been altered by the suppression that we've had out there.
Yeah, great point. It's the vegetation we love to see, especially in the fall, aspen and the colors and things like that, are many cases a direct result of past fire history.
Yeah, no, the aspen's really one of those more incredible species where you just give it a little bit of fire along the root collar and it resprouts like gangbusters. And we've seen that in a lot of our prescribed fires and wildfires here in the valley.
Great. Well, I think that's a good, good place to start is just the understanding that where we live, the entire Roaring Fork Valley, all throughout the West, the vegetation we see, the landscapes we see are really a result of fire. And so I think that's a good place to start. So if I could shift a little bit now, I want to talk a little bit about fire behavior. This is something that as people in the fire management business, we talk a lot about fire behavior. And it's interesting. It just seems like every fire I go to or every situation I'm in, I hear the same thing from salty dogs like you two that have been around a while, from seasoned firefighters witnessing things they've never seen before. I've heard it over and over. I've not seen that before. We've not seen that kind of behavior. So Jim, what is different today than say when you started your career about the way fires are behaving?
Well, yeah, it's clear to me that I see that every time I go out or get on a large fire, participate with these incident management teams as we do with, particularly in Colorado. I recall back in the late 90s, the first big fire I was really on over on the Front Range was about 10,000 acres, and it lasted a couple days and made some big runs. And we thought 10,000 acres was just out of this world, and it was at the time. for a fire like that. And now we've advanced, and it's, as you say, in the last about 6, 8, 10 years, every time I go out, I come home and I'm just shaking my head like, what just happened? Did we just see that? And then you go out again and something, it's just escalating. So, a lot of, I think what's happening is, going back to what Lathan suggested about these missed fire cycles, the accumulation of fuels that we're seeing out there because of these missed fire cycles, because we've been putting out fires for now 100 years or more, and then top it off with the climate exacerbation that you just mentioned, with temperatures just a slight rise. I was just, when you talked about just a few degrees in temperature, you look at the coral reefs and how the great coral reefs down in Australia and how they've been affected by like 2 degrees Celsius, and that's just making our fire season longer. It's making this dry period. We're just about to head into this kind of typically dry time of year. Usually June is a really dry month, one of the driest months of the year. And that seems to me to even be extending longer from the end of snow season, which, now ends in, March, it seems like. And then you've got this period of drying out until the monsoon shows up, if it shows up. And so we've got all these kind of just things lining up, between the fuels, the accumulated, we talked about the brush and even the timber and everything else that's missed these fire cycles. When I talk about fuels, I'm talking about the vegetation that's missed these cycles of fire, the natural cycles of fire, accumulated fuels. And so we're getting these fires that just are seeing the fuels are in drier conditions. There's more on the ground. So it's just like adding logs to your fireplace, you're just seeing these fires that are just escalating and escalating and escalating. And then we're seeing fire behavior later into the evening and overnight hours where we never saw fire burn at the overnight hours. We would go, and be able to kind of sit back and get some rest and then hit it the next day. And now we're seeing these fires, Cameron Peak, for example, in the middle of the night, 10:30, 12:30, 1, 2 in the morning. We did have some fixed wing. I recall a fire behavior analyst in the state fixed wing, flying over the fire, just mystified by the fire behavior he was seeing at 1, 2 o'clock in the morning. And Pine Gulch, I know, made a big 30,000 acre run north of Grand Junction there last summer at in the middle of the night. Stuff like this is just not something we're used to seeing. And so, it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and faster. And the accumulated stress of the dryness, the accumulated mist cycles, the fuels on the ground that are accumulating, it's just creating a pretty explosive environment. Fast moving fires, we're just trying to get people out of the way.
Right. Yeah, great points, Jim. I'll never forget the evening of July 4th during the Lake Christine fire when we were all up there, and it was the most bizarre thing I experienced, where it was 10, 11 o'clock at night. Normally at times, especially in a pinyon juniper situation, you generally, that type of fire lays down really well at night. And to watch that fire kick up and run downhill at the speed and at the intensity it did at night, I just have never seen it before. And I think there were about 200 of us standing around going, what is going on here? And unfortunately, that's what we're dealing with. And again, these factors coming together has made this perfect storm to create these fires that are just much more destructive and much more difficult to manage. So a lot of doom and gloom there, folks. It's and a lot of, I guess that's some of the realities that we're all dealing with, and it's but Lathan, if I could shift to you a little bit. You've got a long history and a long career that you've worked a lot in fuels management, where we try to mitigate and reduce the fuels to as a proactive means of managing wildfire. Talk a little bit about what has changed, at least, in your view of how we used to manage fuels and how we either are or need to in the future.
I think really, fuels management's relatively new. When the National Fire Plan came in 2001, it really bolstered the federal fire agencies, and fuels became actually like a program where there was a lot more concentrated effort to try to do prescribed fire, try to do different mechanical treatments. And I think we've done a lot of those treatments across Western Colorado, across both the Forest Service and the BLM. A lot of it's expensive work. We do a lot of mechanical work that can be several $100s an acre to several $1,000s an acre, depending on what kind of vegetation you're in. I think the other thing is the prescribed fire that we do. We burn several thousand acres every single spring here on the UCR with prescribed fire, and do it in the spring and the fall when conditions are different than a wildfire and those results are different. And I think what we're seeing is just a lot of challenges, with the amount of WUI out there that you talked about earlier. There's homes in a lot of places. There's multiple careers worth of work to be done out here on these landscapes, and the developments are going in faster than the fuels work can be done. I think the other thing that's really important with the fuels work is trying to do cross-boundary stuff. Fire doesn't respect any boundaries. It doesn't care where the fence line is, where the property corner is. Wildfires just burn across wherever there's vegetation. So we can do, really good work on the federal side of the fence, but we also need to make sure that, private landowners are doing the same thing. And there's a lot of programs out there. The Colorado State Forest Service has all kinds of opportunities for private landowners to do fuels work. But, in terms of the challenges, is I really think the scale and pace at what we need to be doing, we're not keeping up. There's just a lot of vegetation out there that needs the work. We have a whole staff that focuses on that. We do a lot of environmental planning. We work with all the specialists to design them, but just recognizing what these fires have done the last couple of years, between Grizzly Creek, Lake Christine, Pine Gulch, it's really shows us that we need to be doing more and trying to ramp up that side of the program.
Yeah. Let me dig into that a little bit. So make sure everyone understands when we say pace and scale, it's a word we use a lot. Jim, in the past, we seem to be satisfied with fuel treatments like right around the houses, or a small strip, right close to development or power lines or water supply. Why do we need to increase the scale of that? Why isn't that suffice anymore? And what are the advantages of looking more at this larger scale, larger landscape?
Yeah, it's those little pieces of the puzzle. You can get lucky sometimes with those now. And like I said, in the 90s, when the fire was 10,000 acres, maybe a 2,000 acre prescribed fire or project might influence that. And there was some influence on the Lake Christine fire with the prescribed fire that was done on Basalt Mountain for sure. And, I never thought that we would, with those small postage stamps, we would get something like that done. But, these broader scale, landscape scale treatments need to be implemented to really, kind of draw a line across an area that maybe these mega fires that we're going to see. I mean, we're going to see them. 3 in the state, 3, really almost 4 with one on the Wyoming border last year alone. I mean, we're going to start seeing those, and we need to have more, more of a line in the sand, I guess, on these landscape sizes to really, influence or slow the spread of these larger wildfires that are just going to be more destructive if we don't put together some dots across the landscape, that, I call it connecting the dots. If you look at prescribed fires, or if you look at Lake Christine and connect the dots all the way over to the Grizzly Creek, we could almost draw a line in there with some of the other prescribed fires we've done, and at Cattle Creek and Salt Mountain, and then just a little bit more. You could almost kind of connect the dots. You can make a really landscape-sized barrier there, if you will, something that could really slow the spread of a large, fast-moving mega fire. So we really need to start looking at landscape-sized treatments instead of these 500 to 1,000 acre treatments. And still, the treatments around the WUI, the interface, are huge. Even if it's a few acres around houses, and homeowners doing the things they need to do, because that's what's going to get a firefighter in place. If the treatment's done and a firefighter feels safe, they're going to work on that home, and it's going to be a lot less stress to the firefighter.
Great point. Thank you, Jim. When we get into these fires that are really ripping, and you and I both we've all heard it. We get calls from the public, we get calls from the media, we get calls from politicians that, say, just order more aircraft, get more people, get more stuff, more equipment to put the fire out. Lathan, tell us why that doesn't work.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Once a fire gets established and really starts moving on its own, when you see those big, huge columns out there in the landscape, we're getting people out of the way. We're at that point, aircraft might be flying. We might be doing some bucket work and dropping some retardant back towards the heel of that fire, working the flanks of that fire. But at the head of that fire, there's really nothing that can be done except get folks to safety, work with the local law enforcement entities and get evacuations going. Because I think the thing that most people don't recognize is, sometimes when a wildfire is really wanting to go and conditions are ripe and it's burning at these extreme intensities, there's nothing stopping that fire. I mean, we pull in all kinds of people and we do our best, and we still have to really, really focus in on making sure that our employees are safe. I mean, the wildland firefighting communities had some real tragedies in this valley, looking back at the South Canyon fire and the Battleman's fire of the 70s, and really, we do everything we can to try to stop fires and try to put them out, but there's sometimes that just that fire intensity is too great, and there's really nothing that can be done until that fire intensity changes. So I think that's one of the things, going back to Jim's point about these fuel breaks, is, something for everybody recognizes. You think about a fire hitting something and it's going to stop it. Well, during the fire, there's a shower of embers coming down out in front of that thing. Wherever that column's leaning, wherever that's going, it can throw spot fires, a quarter or half mile out in front of it, and just keeps going. So really looking at these landscapes as a whole, trying to make as much of that landscape fire resilient, I think, is something that we really need to look at, and really making our communities fire adapted. Recognizing that we're living with fire. There's going to be smoke in the air, whether it's fire season or, this spring we put up several columns as part of our prescribed fire program. And that's part of being fire adapted too, recognizing that a little bit of prescribed fire smoke's a lot better than that real awful smoke we had during Grizzly and Lake Christine.
Right.
Just kind of being accepting of that, and recognizing that, we do a lot to mitigate prescribed fire smoke, but there's still going to be some points in time where we get some smoke in these communities, just because there's a community in every direction from our prescribed fires a lot of times.
It's very true. We have, as community members, we have to learn to live with it. We have to learn to live with smoke, and it's just a matter of, what intensity, and that's why being more proactive with prescribed fire. Talk a little bit about, Jim, if you talk a little bit about wildfires that we don't set, that are naturally started by lightning. How can they play a role in this solution?
Yeah, so in the past we've used natural fire to kind of help us along in the similar way that we would use a prescribed fire. If it's in a place, and generally we've used it in the wilderness, the Flat Tops Wilderness has been a great place for us to utilize natural ignitions. Some of those higher country landscapes, at that 9,500 to 11,000 foot level where we have, mostly spruce fir type timber types that maybe are still in that fire cycle that we talked about, still available to maybe utilize natural fire to keep its fire regime kind of in place. There's not a lot out there that we worry about as far as infrastructure. If we do it at the right time, maybe it's what we would call a normal fire season, a little bit wetter in the spring, maybe you get some rain every couple of weeks on that fire to slow it down a little bit. Typically we've had these fires, keep them to 1,000 acres or so. And, they occur, like Lathan said, they'll occur maybe in July or August, and then they can kind of punk around up there, and it's high country. It's colder at night. By mid-September, it starts to freeze up there and things really slow down. So we can use that type of fire to our advantage to try to get what I like to promote as good fire and keep good fire on the landscape. And that helps to give us some resilience on those pieces of ground that, just leaving it go natural and let it kind of work itself out. And those types of fires are really good. And we've used that quite a bit. In the past, like I said, in the Flat Tops, we've had a few in the up in the Hunter Frying Pan Wilderness, over here south of Rifle a few years ago. And there's going to be instances where maybe one side of the fire has that opportunity, and another side of the fire, maybe there's infrastructure, and we're going to go ahead and protect that infrastructure. We have those options to go and really use fire where it's manageable, and then maybe contain fire where we don't want it, where it's getting into a place where we just don't want it. So those are the kinds of different ways we'll use fire and let it take care of some stuff for us. That's what it's there to do.
Yeah, it's been doing it for 10,000 years. We're seeing one of the real, I think, positive aspects of what we're seeing finally in the political world and policy world is a shift. In the past, when we had big fire seasons, starting in, Yellowstone fires at 88, and then, California in the 90s and Montana in the early 2000s, there was a reaction. There was a political and policy reaction. Most of it, unfortunately, we did start to invest in fuels, but a lot of it was the reactive part. It was let's get more airplanes, let's get more firefighters, let's get more stuff, let's react. What we're seeing now is a more proactive, this conversation about let's make our investments ahead of time. It's safer, it's cheaper, and we can protect more lives and property that way. And this country is spending close to, if you add up what states and the federal government is spending in suppression of wildfires, it's close to $3 billion a year. And so what we've got to do, we're still going to have that large expense because of the situation we find ourselves with the perfect storm, but we've got to shift a little bit towards that proactive. Let's invest money ahead of time. And Jim, you're talking about probably the least expensive way to invest is prescribed fire and natural fire. And so we've got to get more used to that. One more thing, and then I have a couple more final questions. This is having an impact. We saw the impact of the Grizzly Fire on the community. When you shut down an interstate for 17 days, the economic effects are real. Glenwood turned into a ghost town for a little while, except for us firefighters. And that's, for people who depend on tourism and things like that. But last year I did some calculations that for many months, 2.5 million acres of national forest, of public land, was closed to the public. Couldn't even walk in it, couldn't recreate it, couldn't camp, couldn't hunt, couldn't fish. for months and months at a time. And some of these areas remain closed because they're just too dangerous. So there's this cumulative impact, the direct effects to the fire, property, life, infrastructure, watersheds, and then the indirect effects of people not being able to use their public lands, people not being able to enjoy their public lands. And then, that's 2.5 million acres that people are going somewhere. They're just going to jam into other areas in the smaller areas. So these effects are real. And it seems to me, Lathan, that there is no silver bullet here. It's going to take a combination of things. Tell us about what you think it's going to take as far as the long-term, both policy and implementation things that we have to deal with, not just as the Forest Service or the BLM or the federal government, all governments, local, state, and federal, and individual landowners. Tell us what that silver bullet that doesn't exist look like.
There's something out there that got a lot of smart people spent a lot of time on about 10 years ago. It's called the National Cohesive Strategy. And there's really 3 parts to the National Cohesive Strategy. And really, to me, this is the silver bullet. It's, restoring and maintaining landscapes, really looking at our fuels problem holistically, cross-boundary, and really having the supports of not only the federal government, but all layers of government, private citizens, different foundations, NGOs. I mean, that's really a huge piece of it. The other piece is fire adapted communities, really recognizing that, we gotta build smarter. We gotta be thinking about, egress. We gotta be thinking about building codes, all those different types of things when we're building developments in the WUI. I mean, the WUI's exploded in my career here, and just the amount of homes and where they're at, and, the fuel conditions in them. And, it's something that we really need to look at holistically here in Colorado. And then, the other piece of it that we need to be smart about is the prevention of fire and really the response to fire. There's a lot of things that we'll talk about here in a little bit that folks can do when they're out recreating to prevent fires. And, then also, just making sure that we're ready, that you're ready as a private landowner, that you're ready as a private homeowner living in the wildland urban interface when there is a fire. And, what I really do value here on the UCR is we work really, really well with all of our partners, the county and the local fire departments and the state and the federal government, in terms of our response to fire. But, these are all things coming together that we need to work together on and really get some momentum. And we're seeing a shift in that. I mean, definitely the large fires that we've had the last few years, even after Lake Christine, I think really got folks awareness. We've always had fires in Western Colorado, since 1994 that I've been doing this. Every single year we have small fires that nobody really hears of. We had several this weekend that probably really nobody knows about, but we dealt with them. But, the larger fires really do grab people's attention.
Very true. So we want to leave enough time if there's questions out there, but kind of to wrap up a little bit, we have this large role that the federal government needs to play, and state governments and local governments. Jim, as an individual, whether, let's say you're a private landowner, what are the things you can do? And if you're not if you live in town and you don't have, land that's susceptible to fire, when you're out and about, what can you do? What's the individual role in this whole problem-solving scheme?
Well, I think the individual role is paying attention, first of all, to where you live. What's, what the relative humidity is and what the wind speed is that day, and what you're doing outside if you're outside. If you have a home that is in what we call the wildland urban interface, or in that, that crosshairs, if you will, pay attention to what is around your house. How can you mitigate that ember shower that Lathan talked about from starting a small fire in your gutter, the pine needles in your gutter? There's a website, it's called firewise.org. It's a federal website. It's got tons of information. firewise.org is a great place to go if you're a homeowner. If you're just a recreator, I mean, pay attention. I saw a list of unattended campfires from this weekend, from the law enforcement folks on the forest that were out and about and finding campfires unattended. We can't be leaving fires sitting out on the ground. Pay attention to what you're doing out there. Pay attention to the interstate has become a big source of wildfire starts. How far is that safety chain on your camper dragging right now? How low is that, and how many starts we get a summer along the interstate here? And obviously Lake Christine, or Grizzly Creek, those type of starts are becoming really common. And it was just a matter of time before something like Grizzly Creek happened along the interstate there. And by the way, we did shut down the interstate one other time last summer due to a similar incident before the Grizzly Creek fire. Pay attention. It's a volatile landscape out there early July, late June. People really need to be heads up. And if there is a fire start, know where, if you do live in a place that could be evacuated, know where to go, what to do with your animals. Have a good plan in place to get out of where you're at, and know that if you do mitigate around your house and you follow some of those firewise.org examples, it's more likely that a firefighter is going to be able to get into your neighborhood, into your home, around your home, and be able to work and possibly prevent that fire from impacting your property.
That's some great stuff there. Like you said, tons of information, whether it's at federal websites or state Forest Service has some great website. And there's actually, there are grants, there are, opportunities where, some of the costs of this mitigation can be shared if you're a landowner. I'd add one more thing, Jim, and that's get involved with your HOAs. If you live in an HOA in a forested area, some of them are a little slow to figure it out. And we all love trees and we love the privacy and things like that. But having getting involved with your HOA, I think, is really key. So one last question for you, Lathan. As you look to the future, what are the key things that as managers we need to focus on? And maybe put differently, what should people expect in the future?
I think that we're still going to have a lot of development in the wildland urban interface. I think we need to really step up, our fire prevention efforts, like Jim talked about. I mean, the other one that happens quite a bit is we get a lot of fires from target shooting. So just being aware, I think, of what day and what you're doing, and whether you should be shooting tracer rounds or not at that location. So I think into the future, I think we're really going to see a lot of emphasis on this. And you look at Congress, and they're really talking about some big bills. And I think what folks need to understand is a fuels treatment doesn't necessarily mean you have to clear cut everything and make it look like a Walmart parking lot. You really have to, you have to modify the vegetation. You got to, limb up trees so trees don't want to torch and crown and throw embers. You need to thin out areas. You need to, a lot of our urban interface treatments, we're doing, a mosaic pattern and strips, and really looking at opportunities to still do some work on the ground, but also, still have I mean, we all live here for a reason, and you guys still want that view. So I think that's one of the big things for folks to overcome. They think, oh, it's going to drastically change my scenery out my back fence. Yeah, it's going to alter it. But a lot of times people say they see more wildlife and everything else. In terms of other things, I think we're really going to have to ramp up our prescribed fire program, to really get out in front of this problem. We, instead of burning a couple thousand acres of spring, we probably need to be burning 10,000 acres plus a spring, and really focusing in on different areas. And once, even in a lot of these vegetation types, you got to maintain those fuel breaks afterwards too. So just making sure that we're trying to be responsible also with where we're building. And you know what, I really do think that there's more and more focus on kind of how to build homes in the urban interface and, you know, responsible development in the urban interface. But I do really see that as kind of the next real focus, especially after the fire season like we had last year. I mean, it impacted us here in the Colorado River Valley and the Roaring Fork Valley, but the Northern Front Range, Cameron Peak, you know, East Troublesome, those were mega fires. Those really ginormous fires that went a long ways in a short amount of time.
Did a lot of damage, wrecked a lot of homes, changed a lot of lives. So that's what we want to avoid. And well, I'm going to just kind of wrap up here, and then Evan, if we have time for any questions that are out there. So, you know, just looking back, you know, to this discussion, we've through either no fault or fault of our own, we've created this perfect storm of fuels, climate, and development. And that's not going away, and fire's not going away. So we are stuck with that. There is no immediate future of no fire, any future. So we have that perfect storm. And secondly, there's no silver bullet. There is not one fix this. There's not buy more aircraft, get more firefighters. It's everything. It's working, you know, private land, public land. It's larger scales, treatments. It's mechanical treatment. It's prescribed fire. It's natural fire. So, you know, when people look for that silver bullet, which we are kind of a society that looks for this, you know, you got this ailment, there's some pill that you can take to fix it, and that's not going to work here. And then finally, it's that proactive intent that we all have to have, from the policy level to an individual. We all have a role in this, I think. Whether you are a homeowner or you're a camper or a hiker, everyone has a role to play in this. So very important topic, Evan. This is something that this valley and our area is going to deal with for a while, and we can't ignore it. And so we really appreciate the opportunity to chat with these guys who I think have some wonderful insight.
Well, I can't tell you how informative this has been for me, and reflective of that is the list of questions that have come through have all been touched upon. So you guys have really covered all of your bases. There's one question in here in particular. There's a few I want to try to get to, but there's one in particular that I really wanted to circle back to, because it was something that I experienced myself, both with Christine and Grizzly Creek. When you're in the middle of a regional crisis, and it's reached its like full on, you know, the sky is falling kind of a, you know, you're driving down on Highway 82 and everything north of Whole Foods is on fire. And it's just like the landscape is just like this. You guys are used to seeing it, but the community is not used to being that up close and personal with that kind of an event. People want to help. And in the middle of a crisis where we know that multiple communities are affected, and you're hearing about evacuations, and people have their radios on, and they're calling each other. They want to help, and not only do they want to help each other, but they want to help the effort. What are the ways that people can be proactively and productively involved without being in the way? Unfortunately, people often offer the wrong thing. What are the ways that you would like to see the community be involved in a supportive way, unfortunately, when those events arise?
Lathan,
You know,
you want to take first stab at that?
Yeah, I'll take the first one. You know, there's a lot of entities out there that do help. You know, I think get involved with the Red Cross, you know, get involved with some of your other local charities that help during crisis. I mean, that's really important. I think that one thing that we can't have is we can't just have a bunch of people showing up that want to come be firefighters. It's a really dangerous situation. It's you know, a lot of times when we have a bunch of public even taking pictures. I remember back to the coal seam fire with folks sneaking in enclosed areas when I was running an engine trying to take pictures, and just the distraction that that turned into for me when I was trying to protect, life and property as an engine captain. So, I mean, I think that's the big thing. And then recognize, trying to be proactive and being involved. And then, in anything you can kind of do behind the scenes. I know that a lot of the local entities, it's hard for them to take a big influx of help right when the incident happens. But I do think that, just trying to find the right avenue for that energy is really important.
Yeah, I would add, first and foremost is listen to what authorities are telling you. They're doing it for a reason. They have experience. If they're telling you to evacuate, get out. If they're telling you to avoid a certain area, the closure, to not use a certain road, do that, because the focus of the firefighters is health and safety of people and property, and trying to get a handle on the fire. And when someone goes through a roadblock or is in an area, we got to shut things down and back off. So great question.
Jim, do you have anything to add?
No, not much to add. Just, I think helping each other out as being in the public is probably the best thing. And, what I saw on social media and things like that, people, there's a lot of, and there was a lot of rumors that were thrown around too, but try to help each other out. And, getting out of the way, as Scott mentioned, is one of the biggest things. And that helps us a lot, is try to get back away from the area and try not to impact it. As Lathan said, it's really too late to be doing any kind of mitigation work. It's too late to be, wanting to be a firefighter. It's time to get out of the way. That's what I would add.
On that note, can you talk a little bit about civilian drones?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no place for civilian drones anywhere near a wildfire incident. And there are FAA regulations. There are federal regulations that we abide by. You will be prosecuted. And the biggest thing is that shuts down that suppression operation. If we're using aircraft in the area and we see a drone, we're going to shut down that operation immediately until we can clear the airspace again and get back. And that may be another day. We need to absolutely, there's no place for civilian drones anywhere within the airspace of that wildfire.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, again, we're talking to the public here, so a civilian population that really doesn't understand what's going on in incident command and how you guys make decisions and how you're sending different crews to different places. Can you talk a little bit about how you prioritize limited resources on those big, massive fires around fire crew safety and public safety and infrastructure? How are you guys determining where to send those efforts?
It's a national system that we have. We have a wildland fire dispatch center here in Grand Junction that's linked up to the regional dispatch center and then goes to the national dispatch center. And so we can bring in resources from all over the place. And really, we work really closely with the agency administrators for these fires, folks like Scott, and setting priorities, and work really closely with county emergency managers, sheriffs, fire chiefs. And what resources we do have, we try to make sure they go to the most important areas, and we're able to pull in resources pretty quick. We have a really battle-tested, strong system of mobilizing resources. And then, in years like last year where we were really dry, we brought in a bunch of stuff to pre-position and stage just to be closer when the wildfire does hit. So we have a lot of things that we do behind the scenes. We have a fire danger operating plan that helps guide us in terms of different fire danger levels that we can bring in additional resources or extend our staffing. So there is a lot of things that we do behind the scenes and working with our partners to try to make it all happen. And it does. It's a really strong system that works well for us, that we do year in, year out.
It's a great question, Evan. I was thinking about last year at the Grizzly Fire. There's a national, there's prioritization of fires. And as Lathan says, if you're up the priority list, and those priorities not based on how big the fire is. during the Grizzly Creek fire early on, we were the top priority maybe in the nation, I think, for a while, Lathan. I know we had a third of the nation's aircraft here at one time. Not because it was the biggest fire in the nation. There were fires far bigger than that. It's because of what was at risk. It was, close to communities, interstate, power lines, power stations, all these things. So that's the factor, and those are the criteria that got plugged into this priority system. And for the most part, it works. And if it's also very flexible. If we have a fire and not much is happening, the wind switches and starts burning towards homes, one phone call and we will pump right up that list. Where it gets hairy is like these peak where it's, the evening news does nothing but cover fires all over the country where resources just run thin. And so it can frustrate people at times because, there are fires that if there's not a lot of values at risks, there's not a lot of resources on them if there's other ones, and people get really frustrated. But we all do that with our personal lives too. We have to prioritize finances, prioritize resources in our house. And so that's how we do it. Works pretty well.
I wonder, this is a global phenomenon. We remember the start of 2020, what was going on in Australia, for example. And of course, throughout the United States, we're always seeing things. I wonder, is there anybody that's got a handle on this, that's really doing this well, or has, and I you talked about silver bullets, and I understand that this is a pretty comprehensive approach. But is there anybody that you've seen either regionally, nationally, or globally that you feel like, yeah, those folks really have a pretty good understanding and they're on top of things? Or is that you?
I'll answer that. I think it's us. Lathan talked about the cohesive strategy, which is this strategy we use nationally with all entities, State Forest Service, National Forest Service, all the land management agencies, right down to the local and the public level. Australia does a really good job of what they do as well. And, but we invented the incident command system doing this, and we've been doing this now for a long time. We're getting so good at it that, it's probably taken on a monster of its own, and we're the only people that really do what we're doing here. And so, I'm not trying to boast, but I am, I guess, a little bit. And Scott, I don't know if I stepped on you there, but go ahead.
No, I would agree with you with one caveat. I think we have the best system in the world and the most technically savvy and the highest expertise in the world. That's why when countries like Australia, or when there were some in Europe and even Russia, I think we've sent people to, they call us, and they call us because we know what we're doing, and we've got the expertise. Where I think a shift needs to occur is, and I think that's the optimism. We're starting to move towards really investing in the proactive and the cohesive strategy where, okay, we've got the best system, we've got all that. Now we've got to invest where we need to. We need to get the political, social will to make those investments. It's expensive work, but man, these fires are expensive. Grizzly Creek was way over 30 million. So both Grizzly Creek and Lake Christine, $30 million a piece to fight. We're spending billions of dollars a year. So we've got the best system. I think we just need a little nudge, Evan, to get us moving in the right direction, a little more proactive and a little more social license to engage fire management in a more collaborative way. So we're close to being the best.
Well, I want to leave it at that on a high note, if you will. I want to thank you for joining today's inaugural Hearst Community Initiative Town Hall Speaker Series. This presentation was the 4th of 8 webinar events, broadcasting every 2 weeks now through the end of July. You're invited to register for future events in this series at aspen2parachute.org/events, and that's aspen2parachute.org/events. Our next presentation, co-hosted by the Glenwood Springs Branch Library and the Glenwood Springs Chamber Resort Association, will be Tuesday, June 15th from noon to 1 p.m. Mountain Time on the topic of homelessness and housing insecurity in the region. That will feature Chris Estes. He's the Associate Director for Aspen Institute's Community Strategies Group. Catherine McKay, a Senior Program Manager for Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program, as well as locals Debbie Wild. She's a community advocate and project facilitator on solutions for homelessness and housing for the city of Glenwood Springs, as well as Hannah Klossman, Senior Planner for City of Glenwood Springs, focused on a wide range of city planning projects, including homelessness and affordable housing. You can find more information on the Aspen Institute's initiatives to engage with the communities of the Roaring Fork and Colorado River Valleys at aspen2parachute.org. I'm Evan Zislis. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.